What's up? It's Dave Reed from Tesla, and you're watching the Heavy Galaxy Show.
Galaxy Show. Matt and John with you once again, and today we're going a bit more behind the scenes of the music business, as we'd like to welcome today's guest, who's most well known as the founder of the very first independent metal label here in the U.S. with the San Francisco Bay Area-based Shrapnel Records that came out back in 1980. I'd like to welcome to the show Mr. Mike Varney. What's up, Mike? Thanks for coming on. How are you, man?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man, Mike. Well, Mike, Shrapnel Records, like I said, 1980 you started it. I mean, years ago now. I mean, what, 43 years old? I mean,
yeah, 1980, wow. 43
right?
years ago.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, it's funny because, obviously, Shrapnel's linked, with not only heavy metal, obviously, but of course, more specifically with guitar-driven music and shredders. And obviously, I think the reality is that, a guitar-driven music, I think, wouldn't be what we know it to be today without the advent of Shrapnel back in the early 80s. And we'll get to that, obviously, a little bit. But yeah, no, absolutely, man. But before Shrapnel was launched, I know a young Mike Varney was honing his chops here in the Bay Area punk scene in the late 70s. And, punk, of course, right? I mean, that was sort of the antithesis of what Shrapnel obviously became with, in terms of musicality and precision on guitar. But so how did a guy who was ingrained in the punk scene in the 70s, how did you wind up becoming sort of the purveyor of guitar shredding when really both of those styles were so, different and sort of polarized with each other?
Well, I was a guitar player and I listened to prog rock and proto metal and fusion. And I was a record collector. And I saw a new thing happening with punk rock starting in about 1976. Might even have been 75. And so I kept an eye on it. I had a chance to join this band called the Nuns. And the Nuns played with the Ramones and with the Dictators and with Blondie a couple of times and Television and all those kind of seminal punk bands from the era. And but I still was a guitar player. And in the Nuns, I played bass because that's the need that they had. But I was always a guitar player, always buying heavy rock since 1967 or something, when Jimi Hendrix always chased the guitar and stuff down, the obscure guitar players. And that's what I really liked. But I had a chance to play some bass and play with these guys, and it was fun to play Winterland and the Whiskey and places like that. So it's not that I really only love punk rock. It was just one thing that I liked out of a whole bunch of things. And eventually when I got out of that scene, I actually started playing with three guys, and a year after that they became the news behind Huey Lewis. And then I started playing with I get all confused at the sequence of things, but I started playing in a band called the Rocky Sullivan Band with John Cipollina from Quicksilver Messenger Service, which was a big Fillmore era band. And John was on the cover of Guitar Player magazine in the either late 60s, early 70s. So I started playing with him, and we played 8 shows with Budgie at the Whiskey, which was really awesome for me being 20 years old. And then I got seen by Marty Balin, who was the singer of the Jefferson Airplane and later the Starship. And Marty wanted me to work with him as a guitar player on some stuff he was writing. That turned into me writing songs with him. So then we did the Rock Justice musical, which we wrote with Bob Heyman, who was one of the founders, and Marty and myself and a few other people. And we had Leonard and Phil from Y&T as the rhythm section. And at one point we had Jeff Pilson down there, Jesse Bradman, John Rubin of the Rubin News, Bill Spooner of the Tubes. We had a live show at Bill Graham's Old Waldorf. So I was doing all that stuff, and then EMI signed the project and had an hour and a half long video with no market to release it to in 1980. And that was right at the time I started Shrapnel. And, the record came out on EMI with Pilson singing. And anyway, it was a soundtrack album with no soundtrack, with no movie. It was going to be the first, I think, video made for the home market. And anyway, I was already jumping into my own label by the time that got released. And they got an ad with me playing guitar on the cover of Billboard, which was funny considering nobody ever thinks of me as a guitar player, and they probably shouldn't next to the people I worked with. So anyway, when I started Shrapnel in 1980 because, I was kind of, the punk thing turned into being really watered down music compared to how it started out. And I always liked the proto, metal bands, the early bands like Budgie and stuff like that, Sir Lord Baltimore and all these power trios, Cream, even Hendrix. So I wanted to do heavy rock, and there was no label in America that was doing that. I had a degree in business with a kind of a minor in marketing, and so I realized that niche companies, have a better chance getting, some traction out of the box than trying to be a label for everyone. So I thought I'll just do heavy metal. And then at some point, the lyrics got more and more death, devil, destruction, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, man, I'm not really that into this stuff from that standpoint. I love the music. So I thought I always focused on guitar. The first album I put out in 1981, which I started assembling in 80, was U.S. Metal Unsung Guitar Heroes. So they were all metal bands, but they had to have a good guitar player. And that's where people like Marty Friedman came from. And a lot of Lyle Workman was on the first album. He ended up being a major Hollywood writer for movie soundtracks and whatnot, including like that movie Super Bad, but a lot of other cool stuff. And he played with Todd Rundgren and played with Frank Black, a lot of people. Anyway, he was on the first album, and Derek Frigo, who was in that band Le Mans, and then also later in Enough's Enough, he was on the first or second album, maybe the second album for him. But anyway, a lot of those guys, Michael Angelo Badio was on the second album. Still a lot of guitar players that ended up doing stuff were on those early albums. My memory is not as good as it once was, so I just can't rattle them off. But anyway, that was the deal. It was heavy metal, and then with a specialization in guitar music. So it was a niche within a niche. But I figured if I want to hear more of that stuff, because there wasn't enough of it in the market, I figured I'd find my audience, and they would be people like myself, and I lucked out.
Mm-hmm. So why did you initially then, just give up your music career as an artist, as a guitarist, and just focus, just solely on the label?
Well, like a lot of these stories, I met a girl, and I wanted to get married, and I wanted to be responsible. I wanted to be able to pay my bills, and a lot of my musician friends were not in that not in that situation. And so I thought, well, if I could find 10 or 20 people that are better than I am and that are willing to go run around the country and play and whatnot, then I'd be better off just staying at home. And also as an artist, I was always disappointed with most of the people that would come around and give me a sales pitch about, I'll do this for you, kid. We'll do this. We'll do that. A lot of them were just not people who lived up to what they said they were going to do. So I thought, I would maybe find a niche within that I could fill, because I had a business degree and was trying to be as straightforward as I could, and I had the sensitivity of an artist. So I knew what I didn't want to hear as an artist and what I did want to hear. And I gravitated toward that. I thought it was a job somebody had to do. And that way I could maintain a relationship, get married, and hopefully make a living. If I would have known what I ended up knowing about the business later, I probably would have been afraid to even get into it. But I didn't see the barrier, so I walked right through it. And still married, and we're on a 42nd anniversary in just a couple months. So that's kind of what started it.
Very cool.
Well, Mike, we've known each other here for a little while, and it's so cool to be able to hear great stories. Mike Varney is full of amazing ones. I'm not putting you on the spot necessarily. So I wanted to first off ask, before I am going to ask you about a story of sorts, but before that, what's the order between you guys, you and Metal Blade? Like, which was first, and was that you felt like kindred spirits or competition, or how did you feel at that time when all this was happening?
Gosh. Well, Brian Slagle is a nice guy. I mean, he probably has to win the competition for being the coolest label owner. Certainly one of the coolest I've ever met. And when I met him, I was doing my U.S. metal albums, and he had a fanzine out of I think Woodland Park, some area down in the L.A. area, and he worked in a music store. So he, as a writer and a magazine owner of a fanzine, we started talking because I had a heavy metal label, and it was all at the core of his interest was heavy metal, and we both just love music, and so we struck up a friendship. And he was going in the same direction that I was going, and never really had any competition. We didn't fight over bands, or I can't remember ever there being any kind of an issue, other than that he's just a great guy, and he is a hard worker, and he's had a lot of success because of it, and I'm thrilled for him.
So you were first, or he was first?
I was first, but he was better at it. So being first isn't necessarily, being first wasn't necessarily and I was first by a matter of probably 6 months or a year at the most. So he was just right behind. He was right at the same time. We were both buying all the imports from England and checking out all these cool bands from England and into all that stuff that was happening at the moment.
Right. Now, one of the I'd say biggest impact players that you brought over, that you got on your label later on, we'll say, was Yngwie Malmsteen. So talk to us about the whole process of who the hell is he, how you find out who the hell he is, and then, give us a little lowdown of how it all went to get him here.
Well, one of the epicenters for heavy metal in the Bay Area, and even for the United States, in the beginning, was a record store called the Record Exchange in Walnut Creek. And Bill Burkhardt was the owner, and he had the coolest imports and had a bunch of big selection and knew the scene really well. And so he was one of the first retailers in America to get into that whole thing. I think that Johnny Z from Megaforce was also started out being a retailer, and there were a few places around the U.S. that were considered the spots. And so his store in the United States was one of the ones at the time that was really at the forefront of this whole heavy metal scene. So I would drive over to Walnut Creek and hang out with him. And one day he said, "Hey, this student from Sweden came by and gave me this demo tape of this guy, this band Rising Force." And at the time, really none of us could pronounce his name. We're thinking, is it Yngwie? What is this guy's name? And so anyway, he played it for me, and I was blown away. But I was also like 23 years old or something, so it wasn't like I was in a situation where I thought, oh, I'm ready to bring people in from overseas now and deal with immigration and do all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So I just thought, well, this guy's great, but I couldn't even conceive at that age of, going overseas and getting somebody. And so I was kind of focused on being a metal detector in the United States. But then Yngwie sent me a tape directly through Guitar Player magazine, because I was writing that column on unknown guitar players every month, and he wanted to be in the column. And when he sent me more music and I had it to live with and listen to in my house, I thought, man, I got to try to get this guy over here. So I remember young Paul Gilbert called me. He's like 15, and I was playing Yngwie over the phone, and he was pretty flipped out. I was driving around with George Lynch and Don Dokken before they were had a record out in the United States, and I was recommending Jeff Pilson to them, who was been in a band with me at the time, or just a year or so before that. Anyway, I played him, George Yngwie. I was playing for people, and they were freaking out. And Ron Keel had a band called Steeler, and he was coming up to the Bay Area to kind of go through my tapes, because I was getting all these great guitar players. Even Kiss ordered one of my U.S. metal unsung guitar player records when they were looking for a guitar player. So Ron Keel came up, and I played him some guys. He heard Yngwie, and he said, that's the guy right there. I want that guy. So then Ron Keel had a fiance who was one of the people that worked in the office at the Whiskey. And also, I think that there was another, it was the Roxy, I think also. I think it was the same office. So she had a lot of connections. And so she knew people and had some immigration, I think, attorney access or whatever. And so I got in touch with Yngwie and started talking to him, and he was really excited about coming to America. And at the time, I didn't really understand. I mean, I was pretty young. He was coming to America to make his statement. Steeler was just a vehicle. And at the time, I thought, hey, man, I helped put together a super group here. These guys are going to be huge. And Yngwie was always very much his own artist and a songwriter and whatnot. And so that particular band, he was mainly, a guitar player, a lead guitar player. But Steeler really didn't have any of the stuff that was to the core of his interest and what he wanted to do with his music. So Steeler was just kind of a stepping stone for him. And he obviously went out into the world and did really great. I just happened to be somebody who recognized it early on and invited him to come to America and get things started. But that guy works really, really hard. And, he's to be credited for a force to be reckoned with. He's serious talent.
And a bit of a wild man.
Not so much around me. Somewhere I've got some answering machine tapes that might make him blush, but always a really nice guy. Really, I mean, a lot of the stuff that he would say that would make people mad, he would just say it to get people mad. He liked the controversy and thought it was kind of funny. One time he called me up and he said he was just interviewed by, I think, Guitar World, and they asked him what he thought of Jeff Beck, and I think he told me that he told them that he'd never heard of him. But he thought that was so funny because obviously, how could he have never heard of him? But he knew if he said that, he'd get people going, I can't believe that guy said that, So he just kind of enjoyed that, and that was part of his sense of humor also.
That sounds like someone else that you knew quite well, Kevin Dubrow.
Kevin Dubrow was the nicest guy. I met him in 1977 out in front of the Rainbow when they closed down, like at whatever the time they closed. Everybody would go out into the parking lot and just talk and hang out. And I was, I guess, 19, and we just started talking, and we had a lot in common. And so then I saw him, I guess, at a party at Rod Smallwood, who was Iron Maiden's manager. I went to a birthday party for him that was held by Ken Scott, who was the producer of Supertramp and Missing Persons and Bowie and a lot of stuff. He had a party, and I got invited, and I ran into Dubrow there, and he was nice as can be. And it's funny, it seemed like forever, but it had just been like 7 years, 1977 when I met him to 1984. But he had this huge jump, and it was on his way to having a record that would sell over 10 million units here in the States. But he was always great with me, and that's why we did that album together shortly before he passed away, within 2 or 3 years, we did a record, and it was a lot of the bands that we talked about when we met on the street in Hollywood in 1977, and we recorded him doing versions of songs by those bands, and they were my early favorite bands too, Humble Pie and stuff like that.
Talk to us about Metallica.
Well, that was a Brian Slagle find, more or less. I think that Lars was known to most people in the heavy metal underground as a super fan, and he knew more about heavy metal, in that current state as much as anybody did. And Lars even went over, as I recall, to England and was going to try and look up Motorhead, and I think he ended up staying with Phil Taylor, the drummer, for overnight, if not more than that. And again, there's a guy that goes to England to follow his passion to meet some heavy metal bands and whatnot, and ends up, I think, not only meeting somebody, but actually I mean, maybe I'm wrong. It could have been a rumor, but I was told back in the day that he was asked to stay over. And so then they started this band, and he was one of the very first guys to get really big into tape trading. And so those Metallica tapes were going all over the place, and the Yngwie tapes were going all over the place too. And when they came to San Francisco, a guy by the name of Ron Quintana owned a heavy metal fanzine called Metal Mania, kind of like what Brian Slagle had been doing before he had his label down there. They had these cool underground fanzines, and Ron Quintana was one of the first guys to write about Yngwie, and he was also one of the guys that really got on the Metallica bandwagon early and helped to promote them every chance he could. And so, I mean, back then they were a cool band. At the time, Lars had told me that I think that he had his eyes on Cliff Burton from Trauma, which is a band that ended up making a record for Shrapnel shortly after Cliff left. But I used to go see Trauma with Cliff in the band, and I thought Cliff was super. And then I know that I think they had their eyes on John Bush from Armored Saint. But rumor was that he had been asked and didn't do it. But that was all something I just heard. I didn't get it firsthand. So anyway, yeah, the band came to my house one day, and we sat around and talked about stuff. And they were looking for a record label. And, you know, I don't know if they were seriously considering me, but we were there to have that conversation. And Lars told me the stuff that he wanted. And it was, you know, at the time, for me being a beginning company, you know, he wanted the guy that produced Judas Priest. I think it was Tom Allom, and he wanted the guy who did an album cover for some other big band. Like he had a vision for Metallica, and the vision was of a band that was, you know, better than where they were at the time. You know, they just sort of started organically, and just kind of got better in front of the public's eyes. And anyway, I thought they were cool, and I was interested in working with them, but I had to be honest, and there's no way that I could have put up that kind of money to do that. Now, rumor has it that Brian Slagle, probably before that, could have done the first Metallica record, but I think they wanted $5,000, and he was just getting started. I mean, when Brian and I both started, we were starting with pretty much zero. You know, we were just, you know, doing whatever we could to become record companies. But I think that Brian had a shot early on, possibly for $5,000. Now that's just a rumor, but that's what I remember hearing at the time. But by the time that I ended up having a meeting with them, they had their sights set on a lot bigger things than that. And I don't believe that the label they went to gave them any of those things. But anyway, what can you say? One of the biggest bands of all time. And probably even talking about it probably brands me an idiot for eternity. But anyway, I'm happy they did really well.
Well, the $5,000 thing, I believe you're spot on. I did a podcast with Bob Nalbany a few years ago with this guy named Pat Scott, who was friends with Lars when he first came over to the States. And he actually asked this guy's dad one time at dinner, when he had him over for dinner as a friend, he asked his dad if he could invest $5,000 into his band. So I think that was the number he was looking for. Yeah, to make the record, exactly.
Okay.
So,
yeah. That's what I was told. So
yeah. So I think that's legit. Obviously, the $5,000 thing. You know, Mike, I want to circle back to Yngwie just for a second, because, you know, when you think about the great guitarists from the 70s, you know, you think of metal guitarists, like whether it's, you know, Jimmy Page, you know, Iommi, Schenker, Richie Blackmore. I mean, those guys were always, even though they were known as these great guitarists, they were always in, you know, the bands, right? Bands. Really, I think it wasn't until probably about, I would say, I mean, you would know this obviously more than me, but I mean, I would think that Van Halen was really the catalyst when a lot of I think these guitarist shredders were like, you know what, I'm really the band. I'm the band here, you know, and you know, obviously he used his namesake with Van Halen. And in the 80s, you started to see, like you were just mentioning about Yngwie and how Yngwie he had bigger, he had his sights set on bigger things and, Steeler and so forth. Do you think when you started Shrapnel and you really started to, obviously you had your niche with all the shredders, do you think a lot of that then sort of made the quote unquote the band kind of sort of on the wayside for a lot of these, big shredders and guitarists? I mean, did that kind of, because even if a lot of other guys you had later on, even like guys like John Five and you said Marty Friedman, he was with Hawaii, Cacophony, Megadeth, so forth. It seemed like a lot of these shredders just were like, I don't need to be in really a band. I could just be in multiple bands. So how much was Shrapnel responsible for that, in your opinion?
I think a lot. Basically, bands were more difficult. You had different personalities you had to deal with. Also, bands, often there'd be one guy or two guys that weren't very good. And so by, like Yngwie, before we introduced him to Steeler and he agreed to do that, I wanted to do a record with Leonard Hayes from Y&T on drums and Billy Sheehan on bass. Billy, who was internationally not a known guy yet, but was starting to really come out like Yngwie was on guitar as a bass player. He was starting to really be known from touring with Tallis and opening for Van Halen. And so the idea was Leonard and Billy, and Yngwie was excited about that. But then when the Steeler thing offer came, that was to be part of a band that was to live in LA, and it came with, they had a place to live. And so it had a lot of other benefits to Yngwie. But no, I think that I actually liked putting bands together, and I think the difference between Shrapnel and some of these other labels, to my detriment possibly, is that I wasn't really looking so much for bands. I was just looking for talent. And once I found talent, I would then say, okay, I got a great drummer here with Dean Castronovo, obviously Journey for the last 20 years, but he'd be great with Tony McAlpine. Okay, let's do this. Let's put, the first McAlpine album, Dean was on the second one, but the first one was Steve Smith and Billy Sheehan, recorded in 1995. So that's a guy from Journey and a guy from David Lee Roth Band. That's about as good as you could get back then for and maybe forever. Wow, those guys are amazing. And so I started putting together lineups, and like Chastain was a band that I knew a singer Leather wanted to find a band for. I knew Chastain had a band and could use a singer. So I kind of just we're putting people together like that to the detriment of Shrapnel. These bands I had put together, they would not last because they didn't happen organically. They were almost like test tube, like, hey, this is the great thing here. Let's introduce it to this over here and let's make something great. So the records were great in and of themselves, but then people went back to their respective states, got back into their own lives, and the idea of ending up in the same place again wasn't necessarily a really easy task. So I kind of went for the best possible musical experience I could have as a producer in the recording studio, and more so than trying to find bands. Because like I said, when I'd find bands, I'd always want to, replace somebody. And that was hard for me because as a musician, I played with really great musicians. And as a label, I wanted guys, I wanted guitar players that were way better than me. And I wanted musicians that were at least as good as the guys I played with. Jeff Pilson being one of them, and Leonard Hayes being another guy that I did that project with. And there were a lot of other good drummers and bass players around as well. And so when a band would come in and have a couple of guys that weren't great, I'd immediately think about replacing them. And so it wasn't a good environment for me to work in the band context as much, because I was just wanted the best guy in the position. Like it's like fantasy football or something. Like, I was in a position where I could go, hey, let's get this guy from this big band and this guy from this band. Let's put him with this guitar player. Let's get Andy West from the Dixie Dregs, who played with Steve Morse. Let's get him on bass, and let's get Tommy Aldridge, on drums. Let's make a record with Vinnie Moore. Those were the kinds of things that I like to do. I like to imagine, similar to fantasy football, what would it be like to take Tommy Aldridge and put him in a band with the bass player of the Dixie Dregs and introduce Vinnie Moore? Or here's Tony McAlpine. What an amazing talent. How about what if Billy Sheehan played with Steve Smith? And so that's why a lot of the bands that were on Shrapnel they didn't go as far as bands that say were on other labels, because the bands didn't organically happen on their own. Guys were put in the studio to make a great record, but they had other things to do or other interests or whatnot. And the only thing I was focused on was just making the best possible record with the best possible people. And so, you know, we have some exceptions like Vicious Rumors. That was really a band, but I brought Vinnie Moore into that band, and I'd hoped that he would stay there and that they could become something. And then, you know, shortly thereafter, Vinnie, you know, went to pursue his own career. And so a lot of these things that I put together in the studio, I had hoped that they would get legs and go out and become something, but a lot of them just were kind of relegated to be studio projects. Although we did have quite a few bands too.
Right there waiting. Before I bring him on, I would like to thank this guest. He's a Las Vegas resident. He's a very good friend of mine. His name is Mike Varney. Mike Varney! I said Mike Varney. Now, this song we're playing is on the very first solo album that he and his label, Shrapnel, released for me. So I'm eternally thankful for that. And I have actually never jammed with him in my life before. So today is something I'm really looking forward to. Let's bring him out right now, Mr. Mike Varney! Yeah. The god of guitar!
Now, is one of the reasons, I mean, you mentioned it before, you were a business guy, right? Marketing business guy. Me and John are both that too. But being a business guy, finding your niche now is one of the other reasons why you also chose to work with really the individual talents, as you were saying. Did you also know that these artists too, because they have that talent, because they were that skilled, that they were going to last a lot longer in the music business in their career than bands that were, say, these trendy punk bands, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like say Marty Friedman, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
He was great, but I never really loved, the bands that he had. I liked them, but I always thought he could do something better. And then I got this tape from Jason Becker, who was like 16, and I thought, God, what if Marty played with Jason? And I'm thinking, like, how cool would that be? Of course, Marty moved to San Francisco, where I lived, Hawaii to Maryland, I think to San Francisco. And Marty wanted to do his own thing. So Marty didn't come into San Francisco to make a record with a 16-year-old, or as it turned out, 17-year-old guitar player. Marty came to town, to do his own thing. But because I recommended he go check Jason out, and that I thought they could be good together, Marty went and ventured into it and to see what that would be like, just to follow up on my lead. And they really got along great, and they have a fabulous friendship that's been, going forever. And then we brought in, I think, Dean Castronova for the second one. And the first one had Atma Nur, who was, amazing drummer. And so, yeah, Cacophony, Peter Marino, what a great talent. He was in that band Le Mans. I don't know if you ever heard Le Mans, but great album on Columbia, great singer, really good songwriter. Marty was pretty much, of the vocal songs, I think he was maybe one of the main guys in Cacophony. But Peter, before that, he was, usually the singer and the songwriter. But in this case, he was kind of brought in after there was, it was the project more than it was in other words, the band had never played anywhere or done anything before they got in the studio together. That was how Cacophony came to be. But they did go out and tour, and I think they went to Japan. I mean, one thing too is that I am definitely older, and I've been doing this for a long time. So a lot of times I tell stories, and every once in a while the detail is wrong because I've heard it wrong and I've been repeating it for years or whatever. But that's as I remember. But Cacophony was a band that was just for me to put cool guys together in the studio and make some cool music. And that's kind of where that came from.
So Mike, how does it feel when you, because it's funny, you were telling me basically how basically the whole structure and the business structure of Shrapnel was about, getting the talent and put them all together. There's another label that's out there right now that's doing basically the same thing. And I'm sure it's some of probably your older artists, and that's Frontiers in Italy. How do you feel about that when you see something like that? Is this something like where you're like, well, maybe, that's something I could have still been doing with Shrapnel? Or is it just sort of one of those things that you felt like it just, that ship has sailed and that you're now okay now? Because I mean, if you look at Frontiers, they do exactly the same thing that you did with Shrapnel.
I think that Frontiers is a great opportunity for artists to get to make music that they might not get to make otherwise. And that's kind of what Shrapnel was at one point in time as well. Mm-hmm. It's been 43 years since I started Shrapnel, and everyone has to decide when it's their turn to kind of step down. And, I just got to the point where the industry really isn't what it used to be. And I'm more of a fan of music. And I met John by going out to his shows. And before John was actually putting shows on, I even first met him at Triple B's at an Ape Machine show, and he was wearing a Truck Fighters shirt. And I went up and started talking to him because I had Truck Fighters records in my collection. So
nice.
I started off as a record collector, and from the time I was 6 years old, and by the time I was 20 years old or whatever, I probably had a couple thousand records. I just wouldn't stop buying them. And so, yeah, I'm a huge collector, and I love music and love getting it, any way that I can. Right now I prefer compact discs, but I just I'm as into going out and finding new bands as I ever was. Back in the day, some band would come to me, and I said to my friend Pete Morticelli, who was my partner and managing partner of Magna Carta, which is a progressive rock label that I own half of with Pete. I talk about a band that I want to work with, and I say, yeah, there's a couple labels that are after him, and they want a little bit more money than I want to spend. And he'd say, well, let somebody else pay for it, and then you can just go buy the record for, $15 on CD, and you can save yourself, tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And that was very wise advice. And so right now I'm glad there is a Frontiers. I bought piles of their records, and I'm pretty much yesterday there's a label called Ripple Music that John and I really like, and I met the owner over 10 years ago when it was a very beginning company. Now it's a huge company in the new kind of heavy rock vein called Ripple, and I just bought I think 36 CDs from Ripple or something. They had a huge sale, and sale always gets my attention, so I loaded up. That'll last me quite a while.
Nice.
You wouldn't even listen to half of them, probably.
Eventually, hopefully all of them, but initially it's going to be hard to get half of them listened to, but a lot of them.
Well, you mentioned earlier how we kind of met, and that's funny because I remember that night, but I also remember like, who did he say he was? So I was like literally like talking to you, and I was like, I didn't realize who you were.
I don't believe it wouldn't be like me to say that I do anything. I probably just talked to you about stoner rock and truck fighters. I don't think I said anything about anything about.
Yeah, well, even Dan, who I think was there as well, didn't say. So it was, but then it was after some show at Counts Vamped, where Leah Burlington introduced us. Like, you two need to talk. Or something.
Yeah,
you two need to talk.
She knew that I was going and checking out all these kind of shows, and she said, "Hey, I think John is interested in a lot of the music that you're interested in." And I said, "Oh, well, that's great. I'd love to find somebody like that." And then I realized that John's the guy that I met at that 8 Machine gig, because, I kind of put that together. We both did. But John has a huge knowledge of this music, as you know, and but I got into it like in the 90s when it started. So I've got all this super hard to find music in that genre. And at a certain point, for me, there's only so much I can keep track of. So I've got piles and piles and piles of releases in that vein. But John is way more on top of what's going on right now. But I still have, in the hundreds of things I could pull out of my collection. And John would go, "What's that?" I go, "Well, they made one record in 1998, but nobody really cares about them except the people that have the records like me." But yeah, it's interesting that it almost feels kind of disposable. These bands kind of come in and come out, and most of the bands in this vein never have any real acclaim, from the general public. And so, like I said, they come in, they have at it for a while, they go out there and knock their heads against the wall and maybe do some touring and go, "Man, there's really no way to support ourselves this way." And then they get out of the scene, then some other band comes in and does it. So there are bands at the top, and John's worked with many of those. But a lot of my favorite bands in that genre are the ones that only made 1 or 2 CDs that are great. And I remember I played John that High Tone Son of a Bitch record that had been out like 10 years. And at the time, John hadn't heard of it because nobody hardly had. And then the band reformed and started making records. The next thing you know, they're playing Vegas. And so, yeah, it's just, there's these great bands out there that unfortunately they never got on the radar. I mean, John's been the radar for a lot of these bands and helped a lot of them get much more known.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you've been unbelievable, Mike, in supporting, for a lot of folks that are metalheads that are listening to Mike Varney talk. Mike Varney is a big stoner rock, heavy psych, prog rock fan nowadays.
That's it.
So it's pretty amazing. You've been to like most of my shows, and again,
Yeah.
appreciate it, Mike. It's been just super cool and an honor and everything else. And
well, you too.
you know,
And honestly, man, those shows have really given me something to get out of the house for. You know, unfortunately, we don't really have much of a scene for that music locally. And Vamped is a great rock scene for the frontiers kind of artists. The guys that I know from being in the business for years, those bands will come in and play Vamped, and which is the greatest rock club in the United States as far as I'm concerned. And John has done a lot of promotion of his shows in that venue too. And the bands come, you know, from playing some rat hole in some place to getting on a stage like Vamped, you know, with that kind of on-stage monitors is a unheard of thing for most of these clubs. And John brings them in there, and the bands feel like, you know, like they're doing something, because it's a very respectful environment for musicians, and the sound is great in there.
it's such an amazing pro spot. And it's really cool to be able to give some bands, you know, that opportunity to play there. We've had some great success there as well. We packed it for a number of things, but you know, as with everything doing shows, it's hit and miss at times, particularly in a town like ours. That's for sure. Now we talk about like, what bands are you digging nowadays that you kind of are into, and you're like, Mike?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's all kinds of them. Most of the stuff's older stuff, though. You know, bands that made records in the '70s. You know, given my age, if I'm going to default to listening to stuff, it's, you know, on occasion if I've got a friend over or whatever and want to revisit some of the shred stuff. I think that stuff is great, but you know, as a fan, you know, I guess it's the music that I grew up with that's the stuff that really sticks with me. So it's the heavy power trios like or bands like maybe like Incredible Hog or Gun, or there actually was a band called Iron Maiden before the Iron Maiden that everyone knows. They were English, and they made a cool record, and Rise Above reissued it. Rise Above obviously is the label that brought Uncle Acid, I think, right? And they came over to Metal Blade, I think, through Rise Above. Rise Above did like Orange Goblin, like, you know, Rise Above's been this great label, but they also have a division that does reissues, and they've reissued a lot of really cool old stuff from the '70s that I've either had on vinyl or been aware of, but a lot of times it's with bonus tracks and stuff. It's called Rise Above Relics.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a big label. What are there current bands, Mike? Come on, give us a few you've seen or heard that are nowadays. Because I know you like some stuff and you've seen bands live.
Yeah,
that you like.
of
So
course.
give me some nowadays.
I mean, I definitely like. I mean, I've known Parker Griggs for a long time now, and you have too. So I definitely like Radio Moscow, and I like El Perro. I think Parker's kind of a new guitar hero for the psychedelic revolution. It's coming back in a very underground way, but he is big on that. I really like that band Fever Dog that you've had to Vamped and that we've seen other places. I think that they're a lot of fun. They're kind of like the Sweet or just like a heavy guitar rock 70s sort of band with a little bit of a glam edge to it. There's just a lot. There's a lot of good heavy rock bands. But as far as like Orange Goblin, obviously, are a cool band. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, there's thousands of them. I don't even know where to even start. There's a band with a really weird name called Rainbows Are Free. Rainbows Are Free, but I think that's a cool band.
It's cool.
And I've been buying their CDs for well over 10 years. And, you know, they got reissued on Heavy Psych Sounds or came out with another record on there. But I've been into them for a long time. And even that band that was turned into the Watchers, it was post...
Spiral Arms?
What is the name? Say it again?
Arms.
Spiral Arms?
Yeah.
Yeah, Spiral Arms. I mean, they've got a few really cool CDs.
Yeah.
And a couple of one at least is really almost impossible to find. And I was buying those when they first came out. Like, just a lot of stuff like that. There's just a lot of really good heavy rock bands. I mean, I've got a kick out of Salem's Band whenever I see them. I think they're fun. Good band. I love Mucho from Great Electric Quest and Buddy the Donner and all those guys. That's a cool band. Mucho's now left, but let me think. I mean, Slow Season. I think that's a good one. I mean, there's a band called Stew. I think that's on. Is that on
Ripple? I think. Right?
Is that on Ripple?
I think they released one album by him. Yeah. Yep. It's kind of a lesser known one of Sweden. I think.
I like that band Age of Man. You know, that band Age of Man. I think they're on. Trying to think what label they're on. Anyway, I like that band, and then I like that band Child from Australia.
Oh yeah,
yeah, that's good.
That's some unbelievable bluesy rock stuff right there.
Yeah. So I guess a lot of the stuff that I like is based on the records that I bought when I was growing up, which is the stuff that came out in the 70s. Just because I'm older and I've kind of reverted back to a lot of that music. But I've been buying a lot of heavy metal stuff too. I mean, I love all the old classic stuff. The stuff from the new wave of British heavy metal. I collect all those bands pretty much and like those bands, like Raven, stuff like that. Some really good bands from back then I really like. And there's been some retro bands that have come out that are kind of like that are cool. Bands that are influenced by the early 80s rock.
Yeah. Well, and I noticed some of the bands in the stoner scene are starting to have a little bit of that new wave of British heavy metal. They're putting that piece into some of bands like Duel, that band Danova that just came out on TP, their new record. So you're starting to see a lot of that now seep into the heavy rock scene, which I think is great. I think that's super cool.
Well, Duel evolved out of Scorpion Child, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's an Austin, Texas band. Yeah, I think that band is cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah. Great two guitar action for sure.
Yeah,
about that band. I love the good dueling guitar action. That's always a lot of. I don't know. For some of us, that's just something really cool to watch. I know you love to check out everything going on that stage. You don't want to talk to anyone.
Like Redstone Souls. They got good two guitar action going on. I'm not sure what they're doing, but they're out of Detroit. That's a really cool band, I think. John had them at
Desert Rock.
Desert Rock. I mean, John's had some great bands in town, and sometimes it's crowded, and sometimes it's not crowded, and it's painful to contemplate what would be going on in a promoter's head when they're watching a show that they've been looking forward to seeing for 2 months unfold with 25 people paid or whatever.
That was one of the last shows. So I haven't done a show since last year other than Planet Desert Rock. That's all by device at this point in time. But yeah, I think we had like 25 for, I think it was High Tone Son of a Bitch even. So that was one of those points where you were like, well, we're going to enjoy and it was a great show, two guitar action again. That one guy's an amazing, both of them shred, but one guy was just on fire. But we win some, we lose some. I'm pretty happy now. There's a couple other promoters here, and I just help them out when I can on their own shows. I mean, that Elder, Ruby the Hatchet, Helly Giant show was outstanding. Yeah, I mean, that could have been your show. I mean, pretty much they're bands you might have booked in another era or another time. I thought Ruby the Hatchet, I've been buying their records. I think that I like the organ and the heavy reverb. They're definitely going for a 70s sort of a proggy, kind of heavy rock sound. And then it's interesting is Elder kind of has gone more into like a UK sort of festival, jammy sounding sort of thing. Although it's all very arranged, it's sort of trancy and sort of it goes off in almost Osric tentacles or explosions in the sky or like
I don't know. It's a cross between like a heavy rock band and like a kind of a space rock sort of a thing.
Mhm.
But I'm glad that they're doing as well as they're doing. They had a big crowd in Vegas, and that was supposedly not that big a crowd for them. So I was happy to hear that. I've been following them since their very first, records.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great band. Mike, I just want to, fast forward now to today. I mean, vinyl's back, popular as it's been in years. I know you did some reissues for Shrapnel on CD about 10 years ago, so especially one album you mentioned earlier, which I think is a great record that you put out back in the day. That's Scratch and Scream from Trauma. I interviewed Chris this last year, and they're doing great now. I mean, better than ever. I mean, they're just over Queensryche. I would assume that there'd be a big market, for a lot of releases on Shrapnel, especially with the vinyl, that people would definitely be interested. Is that ever something that you thought of maybe doing? I know you said you're a CD guy.
I'll tell you this: I
reissued
a handful of things. Around 2010. I mean, I didn't sell hardly anything, and so that's why I quit reissuing up, because there wasn't much of a demand for it. Now maybe with vinyl, maybe it's different. And I can tell you this, that the Orchard, which is 100% owned by Sony, they have been licensing some of my titles to various labels. I know Tribunal, Die Bomb, that record label, that they've reissued some Shrapnel stuff. There's a label over in Europe. It might be Jolly Roger. I can't remember the name of it. They've reissued something. I think Chastain stuff's been getting reissued. I heard something about a possible Trauma reissue, but I don't know if that's still a topic or not. I did talk to Chris recently after they got off with Marty Friedman and Queensryche. I was saying that Chris Gustafson and I talked recently, and he was quite excited about the tour they did with Marty Friedman and Queensryche. And I think that happened organically. I know a lot of bands are forced to pay to get onto good tours, but I believe that they were invited, and that's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, and it's great because, everyone just remembers Trauma as the band that Cliff Burton was in, but he wasn't even on, that album or any of their albums really. So I'm glad that they're starting to get a little bit of notoriety for that record, because it's a great record. It really is.
Mike Overton was the original guitar player, one of the original guitar players. And he, wrote a lot of those songs. When I used to see the band with Cliff Burton in the band, when I really started to admire them, they were playing some of those same songs. So some of the songs were from back in that era. And I think we did their record in, might have been 84, 85. And it had just been, a few short years when they were together, playing with Cliff. Yeah. And then sadly, I guess it was in did Cliff die in 86? When was that?
86, I believe, yes.
Yeah, that was just a horrible thing.
Yeah.
Nice guy and very talented, very distinctive. I mean, he really stuck out. When I went to see Trauma, I thought, wow, that guy's cool. But I thought they were all pretty cool. So,
yeah. So, Mike, I got one last question for me, a hypothetical question here. Obviously, like I said, you're a label, honcho. You've been doing it for years. Like you said, you've got other labels you're involved with. You mentioned before Magna Carta. You also, I know, a partnership in Tone Center, as well as Blues Bureau Records. All right, if you were going to start a label today, if you had, if you wanted to, if you had the means to do whatever it is, if it was something you really wanted to do, hypothetically, what would you focus on musically? I mean, would you do re-releases like most labels are doing? Focus on the nostalgia, because nostalgia is really what's selling the most right now. Old music is outpacing new music by a mile. Or would you be maybe involved in a specific genre, metal or heavy rock or something? What would you do hypothetically if you were to start a label today?
Well, I've enjoyed 43 years since the beginning of Shrapnel, and I think I like being a fan. I like going out to gigs and not having anything to do with anything, and just being able to sit back and listen to the music, like I could do when I was, a teenager, and like most people do now. It's nice to not have to worry about something going wrong or, anything, but just being able to have a good time. And so, yeah, I thought about starting a label for this genre they call stoner rock, which is it's a bad name for a good art form, because it conjures up all kinds of things that might not even really pertain to some of the people, but it's a genre. But I thought about doing those kinds of records because, I was always finding all of this stuff and talking to other people, and they'd say, "Oh, I don't know what is that band?" I've been encouraging John Gist to be the guy to do it. I said, I'll tell you whatever you need to know. I'll give you some ideas. But I do think there's definitely, money left on the table in this genre here, and I think it could be exploited and distributed differently. I admire anybody who's doing it, and I think that they're great for doing it. But I also think that there's room for someone else to get in there and make a meaningful contribution as a label. And I just think there's the interesting thing is that, like, people's expectations are so low. I was trying to help a band get a deal, and I contacted some of the biggest labels where I know the owners are the presidents, and I contacted them on behalf of the band, and they would then send the thing down to other people at the company, and they'd come back and go, "Yeah, the band's good, but they've only got 50,000 followers on Twitter, so we're looking at bands that are doing more than that, or they're not touring enough." And I'd say, "Well, God, they tour 3-4 months out of the year." Well, the dates aren't big enough that they're doing. In other words, it's strange, but it seems like a lot of the heavy lifting has to be done by the bands now. And that's just kind of the way that it is. And unfortunately, they don't get a whole lot of help. And it's just kind of it's sad. So, like, this band, I thought I was going to be able to maybe get them a real record deal. And I have actually helped a couple of artists to get deals in the last couple of years. So it works sometimes. But anyway, I tried, and I just think that the band finally said, we got a deal. Oh, finally. I said, "Well, what did you get?" 100 LPs and 100 CDs. I said, "Yeah, but what kind of deal?" I said, "What kind of deal did you get?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what's your royalty?" "What royalty?" Wow. "I mean, what would you get? Did they pay for your recording costs?" "No." "So wait a minute, you paid to record your own album?" "Yeah." "And you're not getting a royalty?" "No." "And you got what, 100 units?" "Oh, 100 of each." "Oh, wow, that's great." I don't know what to say. I mean, it's just the way things are, and I guess there's just must not be that much money in it from the label standpoint. But having artists that are appreciative for what a label would do, that wasn't always the case. A lot of times, artists would look at a label and think, "Well, if you can sell X amount of units with me, I wonder how I do with a bigger company." But, like, unfortunately, those kind of dreams are lost on a lot of these newer bands. They don't have any thought of anybody getting behind them or putting any muscle into them. And they still go out there and they still go play these shows. And sometimes they're 1,000 miles away from home and they're getting paid $300. And so it's the passion that these musicians have, and the fact that they're willing to go out there and in such a meager, existence to get from one gig to the next. If I can go out there and buy some, like the other day, I bought 3 Elder CDs. Might have already had 1 or 2 of them. I don't know. I just wanted to do something and buy something. And John knows almost every show I'll try to go and buy some kind of merchandise or whatever. But I don't know. I just think there's a way that somebody can come in like John and have a meaningful contribution and make some money. But I've come from the glory days of the record industry. It's not from. I'm kidding when I say glory days, but I mean when things were a lot different.
Right. All right, Mike, you've taught me into it. I'll do a record label with you. You're right.
Yeah.
I'll do it. You're right.
Yeah, no.
Me and Varney.
Yeah,
It'll be Varney's sponsor.
I don't think I'll be doing that. But I'm producing artists. I've got an artist called Jason Walker that John has been helping to champion. This guy is an amazing guitar player and amazing singer, both.
Oh,
So he's a double threat. If you saw him just singing in a band, you'd walk away going, "Who's that guy?" And if you saw him just play guitar, you'd walk away going, "Who's that guy?" But when you hear him doing both, it's pretty impressive. So we finished a record. We've got Nick Oliveri from Queens on about 5 or 6 tracks on it, and we have Mucho from the Great Electric Quest and Gygax now of El Perro with Parker. We have him on drums. It's a cool record. Don't know when it's going to come out yet, but it's really, really cool sounding. I'm working with Stoney Curtis on a new heavy blues, psychedelic, heavy rock record, and also going to be working with Danny Coker from the TV show Counting Cars with his band and Stoney Curtis's band, Count 77. They got a bunch of cool guys in that group, and they sound great. Going to be hopefully starting something with them, and another artist has asked me to do something with them. So I seem to be in the studio a lot, but a lot of times it's just I'm just kind of helping out. It's just a little bit different role than I had before as the label owner.
And you know what's interesting is, and now you got a little thing going on over at the Copa Room. I find that one
Right.
is an interesting project or situation.
Well, Ryan Mancuso has this cool room over there adjacent to the Bootlegger, and it's got a major sound system in there, and he's set up to stream and record audio and video. And so we had Pat Travers come out for the first one. Now we have kind of a Dio Rainbow, mostly Dio Sabbath, show coming up. It's just sort of the music of Rainbow, Black Sabbath, and Dio, and it's all phases of all those bands. I think we still haven't figured it all out. I'm just helping to put some of it together. Ron, was his baby, and he's put some of the show together. So if I have some ideas, I just go back to the board there and I throw them out there, and if they like them, we do them, and if not, we find somebody else for the slot. But we're all 4 of us, Alice Goldstein and her friend Drew Zell Atkins, we're all working together on this stuff. It's fun.
And you're a hell of a recruiter to get the musicians to get involved. It's one of my favorite parts of living in Vegas, quite frankly, Mike, is being able to see and watch some of that kind of action. Also, the uniqueness of this kind of situation. It's really cool.
This is a cool place to live from a standpoint of music, and it's hard after being here to want to live anywhere else. It's just most of the great artists that I've worked with that are still active, that they come through town and they play here, and that wasn't happening in Nevada, California. I can tell you that much.
Yeah.
I mean, living in the Bay Area, I'm sure Matt, had to drive into the city and park in some, ratty area in the Mission or whatever to go see some cool band. And it's really, fortunately here, it's not like that. It's we've got some really good venues. Pardon me?
We're really lucky with Counts Vamped. I can't sing the praises enough of how awesome a sound that place is. Just such a good sound.
Danny and Corey are great people, and they're doing what they love. That's a labor of love, that club, and I appreciate them for it.
Yeah, and they're being nice enough that I'm going to be able to do a couple of my days for Planet Desert Rock 4 in January. I think it's 25th through 28th. So a couple of the dates over there at Vamped again. So I'm super honored to be able to do
this. This is in 24, huh? What?
Yes, sir.
What bands?
Okay, not yet. Still working on some of the details, and that it'll be likely 14 bands max, 15 if I decide to go a little bigger on Saturday night, but yeah, it'll be cool. It'll be selective. We'll say
Right on.
and maybe hopefully a couple bands from overseas. You know, I got a commitment to someone from overseas, but I just want to tie up those loose ends and just, you know, because I know it's not easy to commit. It's
Yeah. Well, I
you know, when we do
John.
these kind of things. Oh, thank you, Mike.
I just don't know why we don't have more people here that will pay to go see shows. I think everybody here is people out in the middle of the United States. They're grateful to get anything they can come in there. And if they have to pay a little bit to see a show, they'll do it. But I think a lot of people here are kind of spoiled. There's so much free, great entertainment here.
So much.
So that's what kind of makes it hard. It's on one hand, a really great place for music, but on the other hand, if you're promoting it, it's hard to actually get people to come out and play because a lot of times they got 2 or 3 options to go do stuff that's free.
So much. It is. It's crazy options. You know, it's funny as a band that all 3 of us know of and like, High Desert Queen. They're over right now in Europe, and they just did it's like 4 or 5, maybe 6 dates in England or UK.
Wow.
And now they're to Italy for at least 2 or 3, and then Germany for a whole bunch. So
when was the last time? When was the last time they were here?
They came from Planet Desert Rock 3 this year at the usual place with Salem's Bend and Nebula. Yeah, and Sonoma.
Right. That was a great one.
Yeah. You got to see Rusty, who I told Rusty Miller, the guitarist of High Desert Queen, I go, do you know who Mike Varney is? He goes, oh, I'm a guitarist. Of course I do. That's what he said. And I'm like, all right, well, he'll be watching you tonight. And no pressure. And he's like,
yeah, I don't think I ever ended up. I thought I was going to meet him, but I didn't end up meeting him, did I?
No, I told him, I go, dude, you got to come over to the table. You got to hang out with us a little bit. You got to introduce. And it, you know, everything's just happening. You know, that was just one of those love festivals that people were just from station to station, you know.
Was that his daughter on bass in that band?
Yeah. Absolutely. So they're in Europe for 34 dates in 36 days.
Wow. Ooh.
Wow.
Fatso Jetson for about half of them, Mario Lally and the Rubber Snake Charmers for the other half. And you know, they're going to be playing smaller towns, quite frankly. I mean, sure, they played London. They played London for Desert Fest London. You know, where they played Leeds and all these other cities and stuff in England. And I've seen the tour thing, and it's not always big cities. You know, it's not like they're playing when they go to Italy. I don't think they're playing Rome or Florence, which is, you know, or Milan even. So that the unique thing is in Europe, you know, there's support. It could be in the middle of the week. It doesn't matter. People want to hear live music. Rock and roll is at least still alive. It hasn't been kicked to the curb like in the States, you know, for rap and hip hop. And I guess.
Let me ask Matt a question. Matt, what are your favorite bands in this scene?
And this scene, I mean, similar, you know, like I said, the High Desert Queen, I love. I mean, this band Warlong, I'm a big fan of. You know, it's like when you get put on the spot. There's a ton of them. Let's see, just on top of my head, like I said, a big fan of Duel.
Witch Skull.
I love Witch Skull, Atomic Bitchwax, obviously old school bands like Orange Goblin. I mean, I like, you know, I like a lot of them. You know what I mean? Just the whole scene. I always tell John too. What's great I loved about the scene is that, you know, and I've been in other scenes. I've had a label. I worked in like metal and hardcore labels and stuff. I had one time, and it's just the scene is great because the people are just real. They're chill. They're down to earth. They're humble. They're hungry just for, you know, not hungry in terms they want their band to be huge, but they just want to get out and play and just interact with people. It just really comes from a very, I think, genuine perspective where a lot of these bands and musicians are coming from. You know, and even just people that are like John, you know, people who were putting on shows, promoters, label owners, you know, I mean, it's just everyone just seems real. They're just happy to keep this thing going, you know, and I think that's the most important thing.
Any interest in you and doing a label in this genre?
I actually I have been thinking about it, so you might be seeing. I'm doing a label again. I'm with you. I do enjoy not having to worry about working and just sitting there enjoying the bands because you know the thing about being a label I didn't like, and I'm sure some you didn't, is because you know you're always looked at as the money guy. You're the guy with the money, And so even though you make friends and so forth, when things maybe aren't going the way they might not like it, then it all comes back to you, as you know. Like, where's the next album, or why aren't we getting more support, or all that stuff. So that's the part that kind of got me soured on owning the label. So if I did do it, though, it would be more not how I did it last time. I would probably do more like you were saying about that band with the 100 vinyl and 100 CDs. It'd be something pretty simple, not anything to do with a lot of royalties and all that kind of mishmash. It's but I definitely have been thinking very heavily about getting back into it.
Hey, John.
So,
John's willing to have people call him a jerk, and
there you go, John. He likes oh no.
Yeah. Where'd you go, Mike? Oh no. What did he say?
He was going to say that you're the guy that doesn't mind being the jerk. There you go. Sorry, he's back.
Sorry about that. I said John doesn't mind people calling him a jerk. He could be your partner.
There you go. We might have to start Heavy Galaxy Records. You never know.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, at least we know it would get promoted. Like a lot of labels.
True.
Yeah, me being called a jerk. Yeah, I played the good guy and the bad guy my whole career.
Right.
I managed people, marketing departments for big companies for a while, built teams, and that
if you want a bad guy, Matt.
people. Yeah, but you always got to have a guy that's.
Well, why do you think we do a show together? Exactly.
I'm more of a, I'd like to be more the charismatic figure. More.
You got to work on that. You got to work on that.
Yeah, I'm still working on that, but that's what I'd like to. You got to have goals, Mike. You got to have goals.
Okay, well.
But I mean, I do think that. It's a good place to start. I think there's an opportunity for someone to really put a label together, make it small, boutique, very selective, and put everything into it. If you think it's actually a good band, and
less
have
bands,
a budget,
more
have a fucking budget. Like, have a budget for marketing, promoting that's higher than what you normally do, because what you normally do, isn't enough in some of these cases. And there's some bands that if more people heard them, there'd be a lot more people involved with our scene.
I agree.
And that's a big problem.
We're just like 3 breakout bands away from having a real scene. I'm kidding.
I tell people like Jesus, it's part of the family, and that's Rival Sons. It took them like 8 or 9 years to break out, even though when you go back and listen to their music, it's top quality, hard, heavy rock, blues-based influence stuff. I mean, I'll never forget. I was at a show at the Old Joint with them and STP, and for some unknown reason, it was booked the same night as the Cult. Now, some people might scratch their head. So what? For people who really like just good, hard, heavy rock, that was a conundrum. That was fucked up because both those bands appealed to us. I knew people who went to Cole that wanted to go to Rival Sons and vice versa. But I'll never forget looking over and we were hanging out for a lot of the night with Stoney Curtis. Just loved the Rival Sons. Just was like, This is one of the best bands. And I think when you see them live, for you folks that are listening that like metal or stoner rock, seeing them live, you actually see what a rock band can look like nowadays, and dress the part, play the part, look the part, act the part, and they're not kids, but they make up for it in pizzazz. They make up for it with amazing songs, and they make up for it with style. Quite frankly, the guitarist is a one of a kind in the way he does things, and that's the roots of rock and roll, and that's the roots of our scene. It's more polished, but it's next level because they are next level. But there's hope out there.
They came out.
What's that?
They had a giveaway with Mojo magazine or one of those, or Classic Rock magazine, one of those. They made a CD giveaway, and I think I got involved like back then as far as like buying stuff by them. And I believe I believe the singer had like an acoustic sort of project before that. I think somebody actually sent that to me back in 2003 or something. If the guy's from Arizona, I don't know if you know where he's from, but if so, then I think maybe I heard him in a whole other context before. Anyway, guys, thank you for having me here. I appreciate it, and
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Nice to be remembered. It's good to be remembered.
Oh, I've been.
You deserve it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you were like I said, first metal label of all time in the United States. So how can people not forget? Remember you. Let's put it that way.
And created his own brand.
Yes.
It's a microscopic footnote in history. Thank you, guys.
Not to us. Maybe the mainstream people, but not the underground people. We all know.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much.
Yeah. Appreciate it, Mike. Thanks for coming on, man. Really
Thanks, guys.
And if we do start the label, we'll be contacted you.
Yeah, feel free to ask me. I'll tell you what not to do for sure. I don't know if I know what to do. I don't know if I ever figured that out, but I know what.
I don't think anyone knows that, right? Everyone's always about what not to do, know what to do. Yeah, exactly.
We should have a conversation.
Yeah,
all right,
absolutely.
guys.
Yeah. All right, Mike.
Thank you again.
Appreciate it.